Thank you very much, Jonathan. It's a great pleasure to be back here at the IDC after 4 years. It's a long time. Let me thank wholeheartedly Professor Bosganor and also the Ambassador of Italy, Francesco Maria Talò, for being here with us in this late evening of wisdom here at IDC. A subject, the one I'm trying to develop briefly, extremism and radicalization, which for a long time should have been considered of the highest importance for the European public, for the European political and cultural establishments, for media and communication specialists. But unfortunately, it was until very recently confined to the realm of counter-terrorism and social science. In fact, extremism and radicalization need to put back again, forcefully, at the center of the agenda of Western countries. They need to be put back at the center of a political and cultural vision because over the last 4 decades, 3 major events have reshaped scenarios and enhanced radical forces in the Muslim world. And in each one of them, of these cases, the forces which have been enhanced have tried to subvert universal values on which the rule of law and international order had been built. But West's reactions seemed, to say the least, not only at times, but quite often, they seem to be lacking political will and strong leadership. Good reasons were obviously always there to avoid an ideological confrontation and some added disputes to the one that existed already in the international arena. East-West confrontation was the true concern during the 70s and the 80s. EU integration was the most important topic in the 90s. EU enlargement was the priority at the turn of the century. And the post-Lehman Brothers crisis still remained for many Europeans a bigger obsession than the Islamic State. Yet, some visionaries, like the Italian journalist Oriana Fallaci, perfectly understood many years ago that the threat the Iranian Islamic Revolution posed to Western societies was the most important challenge that our societies should have faced. And the tidal wave of political Islam was launched for the first time in 1979 against our traditions and our culture. Beginning with the Iranian Revolution, 3 historic events, if I may summarize, have shaken the Muslim world, while the West, and Europe especially, were focused, as I said, on other priorities. First of all, Ayatollah Khomeini's return to Tehran. The second, Osama bin Laden's appeal in 1998 to all Muslims for the global jihad against the Crusaders. And third, the reemergence, around 2006, of a generalized Sunni-Shia confrontation after the collapse of Iraq's state and the execution of Saddam Hussein. And 2 years ago, the West and its allies were drawn into the war against an Islamic State whose birth, we don't have to make a mistake about the interpretation on how was born the Islamic State, whose birth was the result of Assad's repression encouraged and supported by Tehran against an initially unarmed opposition. The Islamic State took, therefore, advantage from 2 other exceptionally favorable circumstances. First, the global struggle between Sunni and Shia millenarism, and second, the positive response from many Muslim radicals to Osama bin Laden's legacy. If marks could be given to the strategies of the North Atlantic Alliance and the European countries in those 3 different situations, the marks would be low as far as the political vision has been concerned. Better marks may be given, perhaps, from a security and military standpoint to operations against Al-Qaeda, to the neutralization and containment of other terrorist organizations, to military actions against the Islamic State. Yet, a disappointing note could be made on the political objectives. Has there been a shared and firm political framework for the military engagement against the Islamic State in Syria and in Iraq? Has there been any true vision by Western democracies on how to counter at the political and the cultural level the enormous challenge of the extremism and radicalization in the Muslim world and among the Muslim communities in Europe and in America and elsewhere? impose to the peaceful citizens and to their democratic institutions. It was said time and again that 9/11 abomination changed the world dramatically, as did the events which flowed from that disaster. Jihadism has long been a threat, and in the Cold War, the fall of the Berlin Wall marked the victory in a battle of values and ideas. But in the long period that followed 9/11, the West not only did seem to lose the media war, but also the struggle to claim the moral high ground. In Afghanistan, for instance, Western military superiority was often outflanked by Taliban's propaganda. In Iraq, Iran's proxies, Shia's militias, Sunni insurgents, all of them became engaged in attacks altogether against our forces in anti-American demonstration and hate propaganda. In more recent years, the jihadist threat has increasingly come from within our countries, from within the West especially. Many Muslims in Europe have radicalized. Thousands of young people have often belonging to families integrated in the social fabric or only recently converted to Islam, even not particularly religious, have left their homes unexpectedly to fight against Assad. Others have been induced by the Iranian propaganda, also in Europe, to join Shia militias, Hezbollahs and the proxies. And the minority, still in the thousands, has returned to wage jihad in Europe. The recent wave of attacks in Europe and the increasing number of casualties are changing the overall perception of security. Migration, Muslim radicalization and terrorism are perceived by the European public opinion as increasingly interconnected. But many European governments say the opposite, and they make every effort in denying the extent and the nature of the threat. The American philosopher Michael Walzer said recently, "I often meet people more worried of being considered Islamophobic than willing to condemn Islamic terrorism." By confusing in such a way the political debate, European leaders do not help their own citizens in getting together, in reinforcing their common will and identity. The Italian government, I have to say, unfortunately, is no exception. Professor Giuseppe Laras, a very prominent figure in the Jewish Italian community and a highly respected leader in the religious and cultural dialogue in my country, wrote on Corriere della Sera after July terrorist attacks in Bangladesh and France the following considerations, and I quote, a suicidal and stubbornly ideological policy continues to deny that Islam has anything to do with terrorism. They keep on saying that there are other motives, such as social unease in the suburbs, plight of migrants, failures or integration policies, and so on. But the true question we have to ask ourselves after the French events, it is not whether they will happen in Italy as well, but when, where, and how these events will happen. That raises a burning issue. First and foremost, the real matter is that of the generally pitiful condition of our national collective consciousness. The soccer match of Euro 2016 was enough, says Laras, was enough to mitigate the shock and the sorrow for our Italian brothers and sisters killed in Bangladesh. And that applies in general, continues Professor Laras, that applies in general to the Catholic world, with intellectuals who are dull-witted and confused by a naive pacifism and do-goodism. That applies to intellectuals who have abdicated their difficult and demanding role, while they prefer radical chic environment where they promote an appeasing and pliable third worldism. So, Professor Laras, the limits of Italian political and media establishment in dealing with extremism in the current, to the extent, has been so big that has become a problem even the mere definition of a threat coming from Islamic terrorism. And on this been evident the difficulty of the present government in Italy to manage illegal immigration both at the national and the European level. So difficult that the European Commission has complained that Italy did allow in 2014 and 2015 tens of thousands of migrants to enter Italy and then to travel to other countries without identification or vetting procedure whatsoever. An Italian researcher, Michele Groppi, who is here with us today, has been studying extremism and radicalization among Muslim communities and wrote in the Jerusalem Post and I quote, "Even Italy, a country that has historically been fairly immune to the phenomenon, is now starting to realize the threat stemming from the radicalization of its Muslim communities." A report that Groppi wrote as a student here, as the Interdisciplinary Center, shows that part of the Muslim communities are undergoing a process posing serious concerns for the Italian national security. Often, radicalism remains at the rhetorical level, but in many instances it clashes with the democratic fabric of the society with integration and coexistence. As in other European countries, also in Italy, anti-Semitism is the most troubling indicator that extremism is rising within the Muslim communities. For example, 5 out of 6 main Shiite organizations active in Italy have clearly showed an anti-Semitic ideology. Mr. Luigi Ammar De Martino, one of the most influential Shiite leaders in Italy, has been called for active struggle against Israel, while in the Sunni world, Hamza Picardo and Adel Smith, leader of 2 renowned Quranic schools, and a number of imams, have all promoted hatred against Jews and Israel. Likewise, an organization connected to an Islamic center in southern Italy had its members teaching children admiration for Hitler. And anti-Semitism as a motivation of terrorist attacks in 2003 and in those years against also Jews' interest. Mohammed Jernoun, Jan citing Khatib Shafiq and Mohammed Jarmoun a terrorist attempt. Another aspect in the vast environment of radicalization, and this is the most important part of what I wanted to say today, which is an aspect which is often overlooked by Italian media and business nowadays, is Iran's unabated proselytism and support to terrorist activities at a juncture when expectations for a reformist Rouhani presidency and for market opportunities are running incredibly high in Europe and in Italy. A great amount of critical information, as we know, was kept entirely secret concerning relations between Iran and Al-Qaeda when it was found in Abbottabad by the US Special Forces, as was the evidence that was previously been found in Iraq by units investigating terrorist attacks which had killed and maimed Western soldiers. Iran is well known, the Department of State wrote in a recent report, as the main state sponsor of terrorism around the globe. And despite the nuclear agreement, Iran continues its provocative gesture toward the Western world. In this alarming framework, I would like to highlight the UANI, the United Against Nuclear Iran campaign, to calling the attention on doing business with Tehran. Hundreds of letters have been sent by UANI to likewise companies warning them of the risk inherent in investing in Iran, particularly the threat of funds falling in the hands of the IRGC or Hezbollah. Iran promotion of its brand of Islam across the Middle East has been obvious for decades, but such activities in Europe have largely managed to fly under the radar until a few weeks ago, when a very important religious personality, Hassan Azari Bejandi, responsible for 5 Shiite organizations linked to Tehran, was arrested in Kosovo. The horrors perpetrated by the Islamic State, captured on camera and propagated through social media, are distracting the West from the threats posed by Iran and by its proxies. And a telling example was the appeal launched by the Iranian regime network of groups in the UK that British Shiites joined the jihad against Sunni Islamists in Iraq. Iran influence among European Muslims has been growing for years, and even more so, Tehran money supports Islamic centers of Shiite denomination, some of the largest mosques in the Western world, as those in Copenhagen and Helsinki, wealthy foundation as Alul Bayt Foundation. It promotes also in Europe anti-Semitic events, such as the Al-Quds Days in London and Berlin. And in Italy, the Iranian regime can rely upon an organization, Sant'Agata, very active in promoting Tehran positions and interest in the Syrian war, in Lebanon, Yemen, and is so close to Hezbollah that it regularly invites Hezbollah officials to receive prize and recognition in Italy. The fight for values, and that has been really is the final point that I would like to make, the fight for values should be fully understood in this environment. It is the most vital challenge against a fundamentalist Islam which is trying to impose upon us a war of religion. But our democratic and free societies will always abhor and refuse wars of religion. But in order to win the challenge, an extraordinary push for democracy and for full implementation of the rule of law must take place at home and be globally sustained. Liberal democracies must not lose their appeal. They must inspire again, as it happened at the turn of last century, admiration and emulation. Americans and Europeans appear now to be less confident in their national project. They do not seem to trust their institution or to have faith in their common destiny. So I believe that fighting for values is essential also in an environment where we have countries like Iran or Russia even proposing alternative model. And Russia is particularly important in this situation because it's also a permanent member of the Security Council. But on our side, I believe that the rule of law should therefore be reaffirmed and implemented as the most vital asset for the international community. Fighting for our values in the war against extremism and radicalization means therefore that we become confident of a national project and that our institutions are trustworthy. We cannot reduce this vast challenge to a materialistic cause. Are Muslim terrorists motivated mainly by lack of economic opportunities? Obviously they are not. We seem constantly surprised by crises determined by threats to our identity more than by materialistic considerations. And to win the fight against Islamic fundamentalism, to gain respect and trust, also among the Muslim communities, we have to restore all citizens' confidence in our democratic institutions because relativism and indifference may be fashionable in easier times. They are self-defeating when we are under attack. Thank you.